Hey, welcome back, friend. Come in quietly, pull up your blanket, soften your shoulders, and let the day loosen its grip for a little while. Tonight, I want to ask you something that sounds simple at first, but becomes stranger the longer you sit with it. In the Ottoman Harem, who do you think held the real power? If you imagine the answer is the Sultan's most beautiful favorite, that would make sense. If you imagine it was the Sultan himself, that would make even more sense. But very often, the truer answer was someone else entirely, his mother, the Valide Sultan, the woman whose rooms stood close to his, whose voice could travel through walls, screens, servants, and ceremony more effectively than a minister's speech. And that is where our journey begins, in a world so often flattened into fantasy, yet in truth spread across centuries of discipline, fear, ambition, learning, motherhood, loneliness, silk, stone, and survival. We are stepping into a history that stretches from the great expansion of the Ottoman court after the 15th century into the long life of Topkapi Palace through the 16th, 17th, 18th, and even into the 19th century when habits had changed but echoes remained. So if you enjoy these quiet historical wanderings, you can leave a soft little like, subscribe if you want more nights like this, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I always love imagining these stories drifting out into bedrooms, train rides, late-night kitchens, and darkened living rooms across the planet. Now, let your breathing slow, because before we meet the famous women, before we hear the rustle of brocade and the hush of slippers on tile, we have to pass through a doorway most people misunderstand. The word harem comes from the Arabic harim or haram, carrying meanings like sacred, forbidden, protected, a place set apart, not simply hidden, guarded, not just sensual, consequential. And once you understand that, the walls of the palace begin to change shape around you. Picture yourself entering Topkapi in Istanbul. After the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 set the empire on a new path, and after the imperial household was gradually centered there with new force in the 16th century. Ahead lies not a single room but a labyrinth, more than 300 rooms, 9 baths, 2 mosques, a hospital, wards, laundry spaces, courtyards opening into corridors and then narrowing again into shadow. It is a city folded inside a palace, a private world inside a public empire, and somewhere within it, a young girl has just arrived, not yet knowing that the next sound she hears will determine the rest of her life. Now you know the harem was a place with walls, rules, and weight, so let us step inside more slowly. Imagine a winter morning at Topkapi. The Bosphorus air is cold outside, but in the inner courts the damp warmth of baths drifts through the corridors. Lamps burn low. Iznik and Kutaya tiles catch the first thin light and throw it back in blues, greens, and reds so deep they almost seem wet. Water murmurs in a fountain somewhere you cannot quite see. A servant passes carrying folded linen. Another brings sherbet in a metal tray that gives a faint ringing sound at each careful step. Have you ever thought about how a building teaches people how to behave? A narrow corridor makes you lower your voice. A high dome makes you feel observed. A locked gate makes you aware of every key. The harem did that constantly. It trained the body through architecture. One official description of the Topkapi harem speaks of barracks, kiosks, service buildings, courtyards separated by gates, and famous spaces such as the court of the concubines, the imperial hall, the apartments of the Queen Mother, the baths of the Sultan and Queen Mother, the courtyard of the favourites, and the privy chamber of Murad III, a room associated with the great architect Mimar Sinan. Picture a prosperous day around 1585. A young attendant from the laundry court pauses outside the imperial hall. She cannot enter, but she hears voices softened by distance and wall thickness. She smells steam, beeswax, rosewater, charcoal, damp wool drying after washing. She knows, as everyone knows, that the placement of a room can mean rank, and rank can mean safety or danger, or at least a better blanket in winter. Think about that the next time you walk thoughtlessly down your own hallway at home, half awake, reaching for a glass of water. In Topkapi, no corridor was neutral. Space itself was political. Even the baths mattered. The famous Ayasofya Hurrem Sultan Hammam, associated with Hurrem's world and designed by Sinan, stretched about 75 meters, with male and female sections aligned on the same axis, an innovation in Ottoman bath design. Water, heat, privacy, access, these were luxuries, but also instruments of order, and beneath the beauty was another truth. A place adorned with tiles and fountains could also contain waiting, competition, and homesickness so quiet no chronicler wrote it down. The walls were gorgeous. The lives inside them could be tender or brutal, often both, and once the stone has taught you its lesson, you begin to notice the women moving through it, each one carrying a name, or perhaps having just lost one. Let us step into that more intimate silence now. Because the harem was not only a residence, it was also a school, with its own hierarchy, customs, and relentless grammar of advancement. A girl might arrive from the Black Sea, the Balkans, the Caucasus, or elsewhere, through the violent systems of enslavement that fed imperial households. She would be renamed. She would be taught Turkish. She would learn court manners, religious practice, deportment, service, posture, perhaps music, perhaps embroidery, perhaps the exact way to pour coffee without noise, or to fold cloth without wrinkling silk. There were ranks to climb: a simi, the novice, then apprentice, then trusted servant. Some might become gedikli, women who directly attended higher figures. A few might be noticed as gozd, literally the one who has caught the eye. Some became iqbal, the fortunate. Fewer still rose to kadun, a consort of recognized standing. And if you hear the word odalisk in old European paintings, it came from the Turkish odalik, connected to oda, a room, meaning in origin something closer to a chamber attendant than the lazy fantasies later painted onto it in the West. Language matters, doesn't it? A word travels, and by the time it reaches another culture, it is wearing someone else's costume. Picture a girl of perhaps 14, around 1620, seated, cross-legged near a lat window with a framed drum resting beside her. She has spent months learning new prayers, new rules, new glances, when to speak, when not to, how to enter a room backward without ever turning her back on a superior woman. Her fingers smell faintly of soap and wool. Her ears are tuned to command. At night, under quilts, whispers move from mattress like small creatures. Who was promoted? Who was punished? Who received a new sash? Who cried after lights out? Have you ever considered how exhausting it is to be watched? Not for one afternoon, but every day for years. In our own lives, we complain when a workplace feels political for a single week. In the harem, politics could live in the angle of a bow or the order in which breakfast trays were delivered. Yet this was also where women formed attachments, friendships, patronage networks, maternal bonds, rivalries that could last decades. Some laughed, some prayed, some planned, some simply endured. And maybe that is the most human thing here. Even in a system built to regulate them, they still found tiny areas of selfhood, a joke shared in the laundry steam, a song remembered from childhood, a secret kindness over a torn hem. But above all these graded lives stood one woman whose authority could quiet an entire courtyard with a message delivered through a single servant. And to understand her is to understand why the harem was never merely domestic. So let the corridor widen a little, and let us enter the apartments of the Valide Sultan, the mother of the reigning ruler, often the most powerful woman in the empire after the Sultan himself. In a court shaped by the saying that a mother's right stands near the sacred, her influence could be immense. She had her own staff, her own revenues, her own rooms placed strategically near her sons. At times she could watch the business of government from behind a screen, or bypass layers of male administration simply by being the woman he trusted from childhood. If the Sultan was young, inexperienced or absent in spirit, her reach became even longer. Think of Hurrem Sultan first, born around 1505, dead in 1558, remembered in Europe as Roxolana. Captured young, brought into the imperial system, she rose with astonishing force to become the chief consort and then the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent around 1533 or 1534, breaking with strong Ottoman custom. She was the first Haseki Sultan in a new, more formalized sense, and she helped reshape what a woman of the harem could be. Advisor, patron, strategist, mother of future dynastic possibility. Picture her in the 1530s, not in a cloud of myth, but in a chamber where papers are present, where endowments are discussed, where architecture is commissioned, where correspondence matters. She funded charitable works, soup kitchens, religious and civic buildings. The harem, through her, touched the city. Then think of Khosus Sultan, born about 1589, dead in 1651, who became first a favoured consort of Ahmed I, then Valide Sultan to Murad IV and Ibrahim, and later even a grandmotherly power in the reign of Mehmed IV. Her political role was not vague influence. During regencies, beginning in 1623 and again in 1648, she stood at the centre of real governance, real appointments, real decisions, real danger. Have you ever wondered how steady a hand must become when everyone around you needs something from you, fears you, or wants you gone? In the softened light of bedtime history, it is tempting to make these women into symbols only, but they were also people with tired bodies, with children, with griefs, with enemies who breathed the same perfumed air. Their wealth and reach were extraordinary, yes, but they inhabited a system where favour could cool, succession could kill, and a night's whisper could alter an empire by dawn. That is why the harem was full of silk and anxiety in equal measure. And if mothers and consorts formed one current of power, there was another current moving beside them, quieter perhaps, but just as indispensable, carrying news through locked spaces where no ordinary man could go. And that brings us to the shadowed figures at the threshold, the eunuchs, especially the chief black eunuch, the Kislar Agassi, whose office was created in 1574 and whose power could at times rank just behind the Grand Vizier. Most people drifting into this story from modern imagination think only of women behind screens. But an institution so complex required guardians, intermediaries, administrators, watchers. The chief eunuch controlled access, messages, appointments and safety within the harem. He moved between the female world of the inner court and the masculine machinery of empire in a way almost no one else could. Picture a night in the 17th century. Rain taps faintly somewhere over the palace roofs. A lamp burns in a passage. An anxious young prince sleeps fitfully in a nearby apartment, his future uncertain. At the end of the corridor, an older eunuch waits with perfect stillness, hearing what others miss: the scrape of a sandal, the hush before bad news, the quickened breath of a servant carrying a summons. Have you ever listened in your own house at night and suddenly known, from one small sound, that something was not ordinary? The palace worked like that, magnified. Information had texture. Delay had meaning. A sealed note could weigh more than a sword. And all through this world moved human beings bound by role, but never entirely reducible to it. The concubine rehearsing a poem, the mother calculating alliances through her daughter's marriage, the servant rubbing fragrant oil into carved wooden doors, the guard reciting prayers before dawn, the child prince staring at a fountain and not yet understanding that his life belongs partly to ceremony. The thing that moves me most looking back is not the luxury, nor even the intrigue. It is the continuity of feeling. Behind the ornate titles and the political danger, you still find recognizable human experiences. The wish to be safe, the fear of being forgotten, the hunger to matter, the tenderness of protecting a child, the exhaustion of performing the self others expect. That is why the Ottoman Harem feels so distant and so near at once. It is made of vanished architecture, yes, but also of ordinary emotions placed under extraordinary pressure. Thank you truly for spending this quiet time here with me, for walking these tiled corridors in the dark and listening so gently. If you want, tell me in the comments which detail stayed with you the longest tonight. The sound of the fountains, the ranks and rituals, Hurrem's rise, Khosem's regencies, or the sheer scale of those hidden rooms. And if these slow historical journeys help you rest, you can subscribe and leave a like in that same soft spirit, never any pressure. Next time, maybe we'll drift into another forgotten world, another palace, another set of lives half hidden behind the official story. But for now, let the doors close quietly, let the lamps burn low, and let the Bosphorus night settle over stone, silk, memory, and sleep. Good night, friend.